Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Juan's World. And I'm continuing my Unpacking Christmas series, and will be doing so at least until Epiphany, and then I'm going to pick up on Carnival and begin unpacking Easter, so that we have a seamless run from the beginning of Advent all the way to Pentecost, the 6-month period that I consider to be like the sacred half of the ecclesiastical year. And then I'll do something else for the secular part. Now, when this is going to be shown will be the 28th of December, but I'm recording it on the 27th. And this is around the time when people who have been running full steam at Christmas and have had their Christmas dinner and opened their presents and had Boxing Day if it's in England. Usually in the US, if the day after Christmas is a working day and people go back to work, which it's a bit abrupt. It's a Sunday this year, the day after Christmas, so most people have a holiday Monday and Tuesday because they didn't get Christmas Day and Boxing Day off because they're Saturday and Sunday. So you can see it tapering off a little bit more this year than other years, but a lot of people who have run at it just absolutely hell for leather get to the day after Christmas or the day after Boxing Day in some parts of the world, and then they think, oh, okay, phew, it's all over. But if you've done what I've done, if you've approached Christmas really slowly and gently, like climbing up a hill slowly, and that Christmas Day itself is the peak, then you can start tapering back down again towards Epiphany. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Mostly I'm just going to talk about the 3 days that I celebrated Christmas, that is Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day, as a sort of crest of the hill, and then I'll talk a little bit about descending at the end. Today, the 27th, when I'm recording this, is the feast of St. John or San Juan, which is in some Spanish traditions my saint's day. That is in Protestant traditions, they usually don't have a celebration of a saint's day, and even in Catholic countries it's not as common as it used to be. But I still think of like today as being an extension of Boxing Day, if you like. It's my day, San Juan, and if your name is Juan or John, you get a choice. You can have today, or you can have a feast 6 months from now, which is also San Juan, but it's St. John the Baptist Day. Today is St. John the Evangelist. Usually that means the writer of the Gospel of St. John. It can also be John the Apostle. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really matter. This is the most important feast day for me, for my namesake. And then when this airs tomorrow, which will be the 28th, is Holy Innocence Day, the day when, I don't know whether you'd call it celebration, the day when the church thinks about Herod's attack on the young boys in Bethlehem. According to Matthew anyway, he slaughtered all the newborns, and Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus escaped to Egypt, and then did not return until Herod had died. And I talked about all of these gospel traditions in another video, so I'm not going to go into that. What I'm going to do today is just talk about how I went through the 3 days over Christmas. So let's get into that. Now what I'm going to do is mostly show you stills, and some of them will be up here in kind of miniature, and some of them will be full screen. It just depends on what I'm feeling and what the images look like. And it's mostly going to be about cooking, of course, because that's, for me, the big thing about Christmas. Right? Presents are okay, and I certainly remember when I was a little boy being just so very excited at the night of Christmas Eve that I couldn't sleep, because I was just so wound up about what I would be getting. I don't I don't go that direction anymore. I think now more in terms of the cooking. And what I do, and I'll show you either up here or full screen, depends on how it comes out. Sometime around 3 or 4 days before Christmas, I start planning my menus, and in the process I go to the markets, to the supermarkets, and see what's good and what I like, or what will make it festive. And it just depends where I'm living. In the United States and in England, I always cooked a goose for Christmas. Now, as it happens, goose is, a festive dish now, in large part because Bob Cratchit and his family had a goose for Christmas in Dickens' Christmas Carol. But what almost nobody understands is that the goose in Dickens' day was poor meat, and it was not associated particularly with Christmas. Even in Dickens' day, a big, plump turkey was the poultry of choice, and an awful lot of people had roast beef. But nowadays, goose is very, very expensive. I think the last time I had a goose, which would be over 10 years ago, in the United States, if I had to get frozen, I couldn't get fresh, and it cost about, I don't know, $36, $40. And there's very little goose meat on a goose. Like the legs are useless. The breast meat is about all you can expect. And when you put it in the oven and you roast it and prick the skin to get the fat out, most of it is fat. It ends up in the bottom of your roasting pan. So here in Asia, a lot of the time I cook duck, and I did duck this year. It took me a long time to find a decent looking duck. I saw a few scrawny ones, but I didn't see anything really plump and inviting. But I did eventually, I think about maybe even the day before Christmas Eve, I found one. So that was the centerpiece. And then once I've found my centerpiece, then I can think about the accoutrements to go around it. You always have 2 meats on Christmas Day. My family in Australia used to make a chicken as the main dish. And in those days, chicken was not really expensive, but it was not something that you could have on a regular basis. We used to have a chicken for people's birthdays and for Christmas, and we would also have chipolatas, little sausages, to accompany it. So we had 2 meats, and we would have bread sauce, which is a curiously English thing, which I don't care for. I'll talk about it in a little while. Stuffing, roast potatoes, some kind of vegetable, and that was a very festive meal. So let me show you, first of all, my planning document, and then we'll get into the particulars, and I'm going to actually use it as a kind of script here to remind myself of everything. On Christmas Eve, I always make fish dishes. And this is because Christmas Eve is not a feast day, it's a fasting day. Now, and fasting, you have to understand, doesn't mean you don't eat. It means you don't eat meat. And of course, Lent is a period of fasting. And I'll talk a lot more about that when I get to Lent, about the flow of feasting and fasting. If every day is a feast day, then it becomes monotonous. But if you have some fasting days and some feasting days, then you have contrasts. And as you probably know from maybe studying the biology or the physics of sight, that the only reason that we can see anything is because of contrasts. If the whole world was white or blue or green or any other color, we couldn't see anything. You know, you have to have a contrast of colors in order to be able to see. But you have to have a contrast of tastes in order to be able to experience life, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you can experience a lot of other contrasts, but I'm just thinking about food right now. So on Christmas Eve in Sicily, they make 7 fish dishes, which reminds me a little bit of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. In Gawain and the Green Knight, Arthur is having Christmas Eve dinner with his knights, and he's having fish, and it specifically says that he had so much fish and it was so gloriously prepared that it almost felt like a feast. And I like to do that, and Sicilians like to do it. And in certain parts of New York, where there are a lot of people of Sicilian descent, they call themselves Italian Americans, but they're really Sicilians, or Sicilian descent. And they also make 7 fish dishes. But 7 fish dishes is a lot. And this year I didn't think I could do it. So I made dishes with 7 fishes, but I didn't make 7 dishes. I started with smoked salmon on toast points, garnished with black olives and chopped egg whites. And then I had Thai rolls, shrimp rolls, deep fried with a dipping sauce. Then a squid salad. I cooked the squid separately, chopped it up, and mixed it with capers and the vinegar from capers. So a very very nice tart salad that I like a lot. And then my final dish was a bouillabaisse, partly inspired by some Cambodian spices, but mostly bouillabaisse with like crab, shrimp, salmon, and tilapia. So that was 7 fishes, not 7 fish dishes, but 7 fish. And it was more than enough. I was so stuffed by the end of it. I could barely get to the cheese course, which I did make. And last time I mentioned eggnog, which I make for Christmas Eve. I had that too. So 7 fish dishes plus cheese plus eggnog was more than enough. And I went to bed very, very early. So early that I was awake already by about midnight. Now in Argentina and in many Catholic countries, Christmas Eve is the real like Christmas dinner, if you like. When I say real, I mean it's the big one. They cook all day on Christmas Eve. Usually something asado, the parrilla that they cook meats over, wood and charcoal. And they do that during the day. It's a very long process to make asado. And then they refrigerate the meat. It's usually pork. It's a bit strange because normally in Argentina people eat beef on the asado, but they cook pork specifically for Christmas Eve, and they eat it cold with a salad and ice cream. And they serve the meal somewhere between 10 and 11 o'clock at night. And then at midnight, crossing over from Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, at midnight they toast with champagne. They exchange what few presents they are going to exchange, which are normally tokens. Like one year, for example, I got a keychain, and with a symbol of Buenos Aires on it. That was it. And then people go out into the street with fireworks that they've bought, and they let off the fireworks, and it's it's phenomenal. It just goes on and on and on. Usually about 2 hours. It's almost like a war zone. and there are some people who fire off pistols. So it's a bit crazy, but it's just a torrent of fireworks, and then the people go on drinking and partying until the early hours, and then they go to sleep, and they're asleep until the mid-afternoon on Christmas Day, and then they wake up and it's like a normal day. The restaurants are all open, the bars are all open, the shops, the malls, everything's all open, and people are out because it's a holiday. In comparison with Christmas Eve, when nobody is on the street, it's just barren because everyone is traveling home for Christmas Eve. So I got up at midnight and I lit my Christ candle and I began cooking. And for the duck, I basted the duck with a mixture of oyster sauce, 5-spice powder, rice wine, and I just continued basting it for most of the morning, from midnight on to about 8 or 9 o'clock. The day before, I had parboiled some pork ribs because that was my second meat. I wanted to barbecue the ribs for the dinner part, but I wanted to soften the meat up a little bit. I made stuffing. I was going to just make a normal sage and onion stuffing. Sage and onion stuffing is good for most poultry, and it's basically onions that have been softened a little bit, and then you add breadcrumbs and fresh sage if you have it, or sage certainly, and then stuff that into the bird. Well, with a duck you don't really want to put stuffing in the cavity itself because it's a very fatty bird. So I made a stuffing which I put into an aluminum foil kind of basket, which I could then just roast separately. But for this one, I found a recipe that caught my attention. It was the same, but with the addition of sausages, and I used Vietnamese sausage and pistachios. So I made the stuffing. Then I prepared a few vegetables for roasting. Potatoes, which I love, roasted at a very high temperature, and leeks. And it's hard for me to explain the trick of roasting potatoes, but generally speaking, I roast everything at a very high temperature, at the highest it'll go, which on my oven is 220 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about 220 centigrade, 500 Fahrenheit. And I learnt this from an old cookbook decades ago that talked about how people in Victorian times used to take their roasts to the baker to roast for them, because they didn't have their own ovens, and that is what you read about in Christmas Carol. Yeah, when the Cratchits are getting ready for dinner, they send the kids down to the baker to pick up the goose. And it was a wood-fired brick oven. And what they did in those days when they baked and roasted was that they put a big load of wood into the oven and fired it up, and the bricks got super hot. And when it was ready in the early hours of the morning, they raked out the rest of the wood that was burning and ashes, and put various things in. And they put in a sequence of things as the oven cooled down. But the first thing they put in were the roasts. So the roasts, impossible to say exactly what temperature they were roasting meats at, but it could have been something like 700 degrees Fahrenheit. Certainly up there. And this book that I had talked about how when you cook chicken at 500 degrees, it cooks very quickly, and the skin gets really nice and crispy. And that's what I've always done. That's what I do with the turkey. The people who roast turkey by saying, oh, it has to be roast very, very, very slowly for a very, very, very long time, they end up with cardboard. Roast the turkey at 500 degrees. And if you've got a turkey that weighs like 25 or 30 pounds, then you're an idiot. Because it's going to take forever to cook that. If you need that amount of turkey, then buy 2 smaller ones. I mean, I know people want to have this giant thing that they bring in, but it tastes horrible. Roast at very high temperatures. So I do my roast potatoes. I put them in first. I just cut them up coarsely, put them in before I put the roasting meat in, and then about 20 minutes later, if the meat is going to be cooking for about 45 minutes to an hour, which is about right for a duck, then I put the potatoes in about 20 minutes before, because they take a really long time to get super crisp and dark on the outside and floury soft on the inside. So there's the potatoes first, and then I put in the duck, and then pretty much at the last minute I do the leeks. So leeks take almost no time at all, because they're very soft within, I don't know, 20 minutes, let's say. You have to turn them once, and they brown very quickly. So I also made, for a green vegetable, I made edamame, that's soybeans. And ducks in Asia, if you're not used to it, you get a surprise the first time you buy a duck. Because if it's wrapped up in plastic, it just looks like any old duck. But when you take it out, you find out, oh no, it's got its head and its webbed feet, and none of the inside has been cleaned. But the only thing they've done is taken the feathers off and then wrapped it up, and there it is. So you have to chop off the head and feet, and take out the giblets, and that's what I use to make a stock, and from that stock I make my gravy. And in this case I added some mushrooms to the gravy, just to add a little bit more variety to the vegetables. And then there's Christmas pudding. Now this year I ended up having my Christmas dinner at I think it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, because I'd been preparing since midnight, and I put on the roast. I think it was about 9 o'clock, something like that, because I was hungry, and I made the main meal, and it was delicious, but there was no chance that I was going to get into Christmas pudding at 11, 12 o'clock. I ended up putting my pudding on to steam at around noonish or something like that, and ate it at about 6 o'clock after it was dark, which is important because, as you can see here, I lit the brandy that I poured over the hot pudding, and it's just, you know, a marvelous scene to have these blue flames licking around the pudding. And I'd also made a mincemeat and vanilla ice cream bomb, and I had the idea that I was going to cover the bomb with dark chocolate, and in my notes there's a question mark by the chocolate, and the question mark was perfectly appropriate because chocolate doesn't go with Christmas pudding. The ice cream is fine. It's vanilla ice cream, but flavored with mincemeat. And I also made whipped cream, so it's pudding, ice cream, whipped cream, combination of textures, hot and cold, and wonderful. The chocolate would have been over the top, too much. In my family, we then followed that with figs and dates, and I did the same. We usually also had a nut bowl, and the nut bowl was whole nuts with a nutcracker, and you just crack some walnuts or almonds, or Brazil nuts are really hard to crack. And you know, I don't have the patience for cracking nuts anymore, so I just bought some shelled nuts, and that was my completion of Christmas Day. And then on Boxing Day, I took the remnants of the duck. There wasn't much of the duck left, because I'd had one of the breasts and the accompanying leg, which is not a lot of meat, but it was enough for Christmas dinner because of all the other things that I had with it. But what I did on Boxing Day was I took the other part of the breast off, and then I put the carcass into a pot with some chicken broth, and made a duck broth, which is it's not the most delightful broth in the world. There is an expression in the United States, they say duck soup. Well, I'm not sure they do it anymore, but they used to say duck soup as a reply to a question, like, can you come to dinner tomorrow night? Duck soup. It means, yeah, sure, of course I can. Or it's easy to do. I don't know if duck soup is particularly easy to do. It's not my favorite, but I made what I call quackaliki. It's a pun on cockaliki. It's quackaliki because it's duck instead of chicken, but it's duck with leeks. So quackaliki soup, and the remaining breast part meat I made into duck salad, which had some lettuce, some tomatoes, and a boiled egg. I'd managed to slip the boiled egg into my pudding water when I was steaming it, and so I had a boiled egg, and then I searched and searched and searched, and eventually found hoisin sauce. I don't know why it's so rare in Cambodia. A friend of mine said that it's very uncommon in Cambodian cooking. I don't know why, because there's a lot of Chinese people that live here, and they use hoisin sauce all the time. You can get oyster sauce out the ears, 20, 30 varieties of it in the supermarkets. And I searched everywhere, and eventually I found in a dusty corner of a supermarket one jar of hoisin sauce. So that was the seasoning for the salad, and that was it. So now today is St. John's Day, and I've made some dumplings with Asian mushrooms and a broth that is partly chicken broth and partly mushroom soy sauce, which will be enough for today as we slowly go down the hill towards New Year's Day. And Holy Innocence, I'm not sure yet. There are traditions for baking on Holy Innocence, but it's a fasting day as well, so it's not big for my my cooking. So there's my climb upwards. Now we're going to go down towards New Year's, and I'll talk about that on Friday, because there's a whole set of cooking traditions associated with New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, and then on to Epiphany, and we're just slowly descending that hill. But once we get to the bottom, then we've got Plough Monday coming up. We've got Carnival, leading on to Shrove Tuesday, Pancake Day, Ash Wednesday, and then into Lent. So slowly up, slowly down. And I hope you have a splendid week, and I will see you on New Year's